Well, like everybody, we're hoping that you have an agreement coming out of Paris at the end of next week. Ideally, that this agreement will have a level of ambition such that the world can say, you know, people came together in Paris to do better for the global commons because if a country in Latin America does all the right things, like Costa Rica, which in 2021 will be carbon neutral, and France doesn't do anything or not enough, it's not good for Costa Rica and it's not good for France. So this is the kind of level of ambition that you want to see. And more importantly, that whatever is agreed has a way to be, accounted for, and that those commitments have some kind of force. If, regardless of the legal force, more importantly, the collective force to make them be implemented.
Okay, so concretely, you are expecting more money, real money from the developed country to the less developed country, right?
Well, look, I mean, I think the pressures on emerging economies are huge. Unlike developed countries, we still have a long way to get to be developed countries. And when you are in a world of low growth, where you're in a world where there is all these demands and limited resources, the only way for this to happen is to understand that at the center of doing all of the right things on climate change, you require to do development. And to do that, you require more financing.
Okay, so do you expect that the $100 billion, which is a pledge of a developed country, will be reached during COP21? Do you think it's possible?
Well, there is a study that was done by the OECD. There's still questions of definition, what is climate finance, what's included, what is not included. But just this report that was presented back in September in Lima in the World Bank meetings, in essence, demonstrated that about a third of the current financing going towards climate change is coming from multilateral institutions like the IDB, like the World Bank, like the Asia Development Bank, like the Africa Development Bank. So it's fundamental to see that there is more of that financing coming, and this is how I think we will be able to help the whole world come up to the challenge of facing up to climate change.
Okay, and concretely, what is the role of Inter-American Development Bank in this process?
Well, fundamentally, we're the largest source of financing for emerging countries in Latin America. Basically, our footprint is from Mexico, Central America, Caribbean, and all of South America. And here, we are working with all of the countries in this region to help them meet their own estimations of what their own reductions are going to be, and translate that into both projects of adaptation and climate resilience.
Okay. How you say the country like Costa Rica did a lot for to go green, but some other countries, for example Brazil, have disappointed a bit the observers. What do you think about this? Does Latin America need to have a global policy about how to go green?
Well, look, I think each country has to make its own decisions. I mean, it's within their own sovereignty. Brazil, of course, being the largest country in all of Latin America, has already done a lot. I mean, in terms of reduction of emissions, Brazil has one of the most important elements of the global commons, if you like, which is the Amazon, which is not all of the Amazon, but about 60% of the Amazon is in Brazil. That's the most important carbon sink that exists. And a lot of the deforestation that was taking place there, they've managed to begin to reduce it. Equally much, most of the emissions coming out of Latin America and Brazil as well come from deforestation, come from agriculture, from cattle raising, and these are some of the things that we need to continue to work on, because we got to feed the world and feed ourselves, and we got to do it in a more sustainably responsive way.
Okay, but maybe it would have been easier to get money from developed country with a better ENDC from a country like Brazil, isn't it?
Well, I think Brazil, which is a middle-income country, which is on the path to development, still requires support from the world community to precisely fund many of these programs. We have been working with Brazil in, for instance, what's called the ARPA Plus, which is the protected areas of Brazil. This is the protection of the Amazon forest. And these are the kinds of resources that emerging countries are looking the developed world to put on the table.
Okay. Because some African country has proposed very, very strong ENDC with a lot of proposals, maybe in some ways more ambitious than the Brazilian one, but they are poorer country than Brazil. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but this is all, of course, the process of development of countries. You know, how come, for instance, developed countries, France included, cannot have even more ambitious reductions of emissions? Because you're at a period of development that it is much more difficult to do significant reduction of emissions than, say, a poor country that has very little industrialization. So, you know, you have to have these things into consideration. And equally, many of the vulnerable countries in Africa, in the Pacific, islands in the Pacific, are very concerned in the level of ambition of reduction of heat in the world. Instead of being 2.7 degrees, they would like to have it to be 1.7 degrees, which would in turn mean that you would have to have far more resources and ambitions of countries to reduce collectively emissions.
Okay, so it's definitely the role of developed country to make it better. It's
no question. A lot of the problems that we have in the world started in developed countries. I think this, of course, is not a blaming game. This is a question of shared responsibility, but there is some that have more responsibility than others.
okay. Thank you very much for coming.